Chapters 8 through 14 of the Book of Judges, from the Holy Bible in Modern English. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Mark Penfold. The Holy Bible in Modern English, translated by Ferrar Fenton. The Book of Judges, chapters 8 through 14. Chapter 8. The men of Ephraim, however, asked him, "Why have you done this business for us and not consulted us? For you have gone to war with Midian and continued with it rashly." But he answered, "What have I done now more than you? Are not the gleanings of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given to your hand the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zaeb. So what have I been able to do more than you? Then turn your spirit away from me when speaking about this matter." Then Gideon went beyond the Jordan himself and the 300 men with him, weary, yet pursuing, and said to the people of Succoth, "Give, I entreat you, a little bread to the men who are with me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebach and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the masters of Succoth replied, "Are the hands of Zebach and Zalmunna in your power that we should give you any bread?" Gideon, however, retorted, "When the ever-living gives Zebach and Zalmunna into my power, then I will inform your governors with thorns from the desert and with briars." From there he went to Phanuel, and asked them the same. But the men of Phanuel answered like the men of Succoth. So Gideon also replied to the men of Phanuel, "When I return with peace, I will throw down this towering Phanuel." Now Zebach and Zalmunna were encamped at Karkar with about 15,000 men, all they had left them, but with the whole camp of the Beni Kedem, 120,000 infantry, accomplished swordsmen. Gideon consequently advanced by the lower road to the general's pavilion from the east of Nobach and Yagba, and attacked the camp whilst the camp was resting in security. Zebach and Zalmunna, however, fled, and he pursued them and captured both the kings of Midian, Zebach and Zalmunna, and all the camp was thrown into confusion. When Gideon ben Joash returned from the war, coming up from the desert, he captured a young man from the people of Succoth and questioned him, and he described to him the chief men of Succoth, and the 7 aldermen and the 7 councilmen. Then he advanced against the people of Succoth and said, "Here are Zebach and Zalmunna, about whom you insulted me, saying, 'Is the hand of Zebach and Zalmunna in your power yet that we should give bread to your weary men?'" Then he seized the aldermen of the town, and informed the people of Succoth with the thorns and briars of the desert. Next he threw down the tower of Phanuel, and killed the chiefs of the village. Then he asked Zebach and Zalmunna, "What sort of men were they whom you murdered at Thabor?" And they replied, "Like yourself, each one in appearance like the distinguished son of a king." When he answered, "They were my brothers, sons of my mother. As God lives to me, if you had spared their lives, I would not have killed you." Then he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." But the youth did not draw his sword, because he was afraid, for he was only a lad. So Zebach and Zalmunna said, "Get yourself up and assail us, like a man in his vigor." Gideon then arose and killed Zebach and Zalmunna, and took the crescents that were upon the necks of their camels. The men of Israel afterwards said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your descendants, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon replied to them, "I will not be governor over you, nor shall my son govern you. The ever-living is your governor." But Gideon said, "I request each of you to give me a ring from your plunder." For as they were Ishmaelites, they wore gold rings. And they replied, "We will give you that gift." So he spread his cloak, and each threw upon it a ring from the plunder. And the gold rings which he asked were 1,700 shekels in weight, besides the crescents and eardrops, and cloaks, and the woven shawls of the king of Midian, and the necklaces which were on the necks of the camels. Gideon afterwards made a suit of armor of them, and set it up in his village at Ophrah, but all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and all his house. Midian was thus subdued before the Israelites, and it did not again raise its head, so that the country had rest for 40 years in the time of Gideon. Jerub-Baal ben Joash, however, returned to his home, and Gideon had 70 sons produced from his loins, for he had many wives. But his secondary wife, who was in Shechem, bore him also a son, and his name was Abimelech. Then Gideon ben Joash died with good gray hair, and they buried him in the tomb of Joash his father, in Ophrah of Abiezer. But when Gideon ben Joash was dead, the Israelites went again and whored after Baal, and chose Baal-berith as their god. For the Israelites remembered not their ever-living God, who redeemed them from the power of all their enemies around. Nor did they act kindly to the family of Jerub-baal-Gideon, for all the good he had done for them. Chapter 9. Abimelech went to Shechem, and spoke to them, and to all the clan of the house of his mother's father, to say, I wish you to whisper to the ears of the Baalites of Shechem, what good is it to you, this government of 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, compared to the government of a single man? And remember that I am your bones and flesh. So his mother's relatives whispered all these things about him to the ears of all the Baalites of Shechem, and turned their hearts after Abimelech, for they said, He is our countryman. They therefore gave him 70 shekels from the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired 70 vagabonds and reprobates, and they followed him. Then he went to the house of his father in Ophrah, and murdered his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, upon a single stone, except Jotham ben Jerubbaal the youngest, for he hid himself. Then all the Baalites of Shechem and the house of Miloah proceeded and went and made Abimelech king, to reign in Allon, the garrison of Shechem. When this was reported to Jotham, he went and stood on Mount Gerizim, and raised his voice, and called to them, and said, Listen to me, you Baalites of Shechem, and let your gods listen. The trees once went out to elect a king over themselves, and they said to the olive, Will you be king over us? But the olive replied to them, Shall I resign my fatness, with which gods and men are delighted, to trouble myself about trees? Then the trees said to the fig, Come and be king over us. When the fig replied to them, Shall I abandon my pleasantness and beautiful fruit to go and trouble myself about the trees? Next the trees said to the vine, Come and be king over us. But it answered them, Shall I abandon my wine which delights gods and men, and go and trouble myself about the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, Come, you reign over us. And the bramble answered the trees, If you really consecrate me as your king, come here, shelter under me. And if you will not, fire shall go out from the bramble and consume the cedar of Lebanon. So now, if in truth and uprightness you have made Abimelech your king, and if you have done handsomely to Jerubbaal and to his family, and if you have done to him according to the work of the hand of my father, who fought for you, and poured out his soul for you, who have risen upon my father's family today, and murdered 70 persons on a single stone, and have elected Abimelech, the son of his slave, over the Baalites of Shechem, because he is your relative, then according to the truth and justice with which you have acted towards Jerubbaal and towards his family today, be content with Abimelech, and let him be content with you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech, and consume the Baalites of Shechem and the house of Miloah, and let fire come out from the Baalites of Shechem and from the house of Miloah, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham fled and hid himself in Barah, and stayed there from the presence of Abimelech his brother. When Abimelech had been a chief in Israel for 3 years, the ever-living sent a bad feeling between Abimelech and the Baalites of Shechem. Consequently, the Baalites of Shechem plotted against Abimelech. The injury done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, and their blood, returned upon Abimelech their brother, who had murdered them, and upon the Baalites of Shechem, who encouraged his hand to the murder of his brothers. So the Baalites of Shechem laid an ambush upon the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed near them in the road, and it was reported to Abimelech. Then Gaal ben Abd came to Shechem with his brothers, and passed into it, and the Baalites of Shechem confided in him, and went out and reaped their vineyards, and pressed them, and afterwards made a feast, and went to the house of their god, and ate and drank, and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal ben Abd exclaimed, Who is Abimelech? And what was Shechem that we should be enslaved? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebul his lieutenant? They were slaves, those furious low-bred bastards, but why should we be enslaved? But if this people were under my hand, I would turn Abimelech off. Then he shouted against Abimelech, Collect your army, and meet me outside. When Zebul, the commandant of the city, heard of the speech of Gaal ben Abd, he was furious, and sent messengers to Abimelech at Tharma, to say, I find Gaal ben Abd and his brothers have come to Shechem, and that your rivals in the town are against you. So now get up by night, you and all the force with you, and hide in the fields, and at dawn, when the sun rises, advance and attack the city, and then you and the force you bring with you can do to him whatever you find in your power." Abimelech consequently arose that night, and all his force with him, and they advanced secretly against Shechem in 4 divisions. But Gaal ben Abd went out and stationed himself outside the gate of the town. Then Abimelech and the force with him arose from their ambush, and Gaal saw the force, and asked Zebul, "Is that an army descending from the top of the hills?" When Zebul replied to him, "You see the shadow of the mountains instead of men." But Gaal continued to speak, and said, "Look, it is a force that descends from the highlands, and 1 division comes from the road of Alan Maonim." Then Zebul replied to him, "Where now is the mouth which said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should be enslaved?' Is not that the man whom you despised? Now go and fight with him." Gaal consequently went out with the Baalites of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. But Abimelech repulsed him, and he fled before him, and many fell wounded before the gate of the town. Abimelech then retired to the highlands, until Zebul advised Gaal and his relatives against remaining in Shechem. So when morning came, his army went out to the fields, and he reported it to Abimelech. So he took his force and divided it under 3 leaders, and lay in ambush in the fields, and watched until the army had come clear of the town, when he arose and assailed it. Then Abimelech and the officers who were with him rushed and seized the open gate of the town, and the 2 other leaders charged upon all who were in the fields and repulsed them, whilst Abimelech assailed the town all that day, and captured it, and killed the people who were in it, and threw down the houses, and sowed it with salt. When all the Baalites of Shechem Tower heard of it, they went to the tower of the house of their god, Berith, and it was reported to Abimelech that all the Baalites had assembled at Shechem Tower. Abimelech consequently ascended Mount Zalmon with all his force, where he took an axe and cut boughs from the trees, and hoisted them upon his shoulder, and said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, be quick and do the same." So all the army each cut a branch, and marched after Abimelech, and piled them against the tower, and set the tower on fire with them, and thus killed all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women. Then Abimelech marched to Thebets, and besieged Thebets, and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the middle of the town, and all the men and women fled there, and shut themselves in, and went to the roof of the tower. Abimelech, however, advanced to the tower, and assailed it, and approached close to the door of the tower to consume it with fire. But a woman threw an upper millstone upon the head of Abimelech, and broke his skull. When he immediately called to the youth who carried his arms, and said, "Draw your sword, and kill me, for fear that they should say, 'A woman killed him.'" So his squire drew, and killed him. And when the men of Israel saw Abimelech was dead, each returned to his home. Thus God turned upon Abimelech the wrong which he did to his father in murdering his 70 brothers. God caused all the wickedness of the men of Shechem to return upon their heads, and brought the curse of Jotham the son of Jerubbaal upon them. Chapter 10. After Abimelech, a man of Issachar, Thola ben Phua, arose to save Israel. He resided in Shamar on Mount Ephraim, and judged Israel for 13 years, when he died and was buried in Shamar. Then Jair the Gileadite arose after him, and judged Israel for 12 years, and he had 30 sons who rode upon asses, and they possessed 30 villages, called the villages of Jair to this day. They are in the country of Gilead. When Jair died, he was buried in Camon. Then the children of Israel repeated the doing of evil in the sight of the ever-living, and served the Baalim and Ashtaroths, and the gods of Aram, and the gods of Zidon, and the gods of Moab, and the gods of the sons of Aram, and the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the ever-living, and did not serve him. So the anger of the ever-living burnt against Israel, and he gave them up to the hand of the Philistines, and to the power of the people of Ammon, who crushed and oppressed the children of Israel, who were in Bashan beyond the Jordan, in the country of the Amorites, and in Gilead, for 18 years. The Amorites also passed over the Jordan to make war with Judah and Benjamin, and the house of Ephraim, and ravaged Israel greatly. Then the children of Israel cried to the ever-living, saying, "We have sinned against you, for we have forsaken our God and served the Baalim." But the ever-living replied to the children of Israel, Have you not the Mitzrites, and the Amorites, and the Beni-Ammon, and the Philistines, and the Zidonians as refuges from oppression for yourselves, that you call to me to save you from their hand, when you have forsaken me and served other gods? Therefore, I will not continue to save you. Go and call the gods whom you have chosen for yourselves. Let them save you in the period of your distress. The children of Israel, however, said to the ever-living, We have sinned. Do to us all that is good in your sight. Oh, save us now today. And they put away the foreign gods from amongst themselves, and served the ever-living, and he stayed his anger against Israel. Then the Ammonites assembled and encamped in Gilead, and the children of Israel collected and encamped in Mizpah. But the army said to the chiefs of Gilead, We have not a man to lead us. Let the man who is able to fight with the Ammonites be the head of all the inhabitants of Gilead. Chapter 11. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a heroic man, but he was the son of a foreigner who bore Jephthah to Gilead. His Gileadite wife also bore him sons, and that woman's sons grew up and drove Jephthah out, and said, You shall not inherit with the family of our father, for you are the son of a foreigner. Jephthah consequently fled from the presence of his brothers, and lived in the country of Tob, where Jephthah collected vagabond fellows who came to him. This was in the time when the Ammonites were at war with the children of Israel. So the judges of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the district of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, Come and be our leader, and fight for us with the Ammonites. But Jephthah replied to the judges of Gilead, Did you not hate me, and drive me from the house of my father? Then why should you come to me now that you are in distress? The judges of Gilead, however, answered Jephthah, In spite of that, return now with us and fight the Ammonites, and you shall be the chief of all the inhabitants of Gilead. Then Jephthah said to the judges of Gilead, If I return with you to fight the Ammonites, and the ever-living gives them to my advance, am I to be your chief? And the judges of Gilead answered Jephthah, Let the ever-living decide between us if it is not done as you say. Jephthah thereupon went with the judges of Gilead, and the people appointed him over themselves as a chief and leader, and Jephthah took the oaths before them in Mizpah. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites to say, What is there between me and you, that you have come to fight me in my country? When the king of Ammon answered the messengers of Jephthah, Because Israel, when coming up from the Mitzrayim, seized my country from Arnon to the Jabbok and the Jordan, but you can go back to them in peace. But Jephthah sent messengers again to the king of the Beni-Ammon, and said to him, Jephthah replied thus, Israel did not seize the country of Moab and the country of the Beni-Ammon, for in the coming up from the Mitzrayim, Israel went in the desert by the Red Sea, and came to Kadesh, when Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom to say, I wish to pass over by your country. But the king of Edom and the king of Moab replied that they were not willing. Therefore Israel halted at Kadesh, and marched into the desert, and went round the land of Moab, and encamped at the river Arnon, and did not invade the bounds of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. From there Israel sent ambassadors to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and said to him, I, Israel, would pass through your country to my place. But Sihon would not trust Israel to pass through his boundaries. So Sihon collected all his forces, and encamped at Jotz, and fought with Israel. The ever-living God of Israel, however, gave Sihon and all his army to the hand of Israel, and Israel conquered all the country of the Amorites residing in that region, and acquired all the region of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the desert to the Jordan. And since the ever-living God of Israel has driven the Amorites before his people, yet you would possess. Cannot you possess what Chemosh your God has caused you to possess? And whatever our ever-living God has caused us to possess, we shall possess for ourselves. And now, are you better than Balak bin Ziphor, the great king of Moab? Greater than Israel? If you can fight with them, fight with them. Israel, however, has dwelt in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and all the towns along the Arnon 300 years. So why have you not recovered them during that period? And I myself have not offended you, but you have done wrong to me in making war upon me. Let the ever-living as judge decide today between the children of Israel and the Beni-Ammon. But the king of the Ammonites would not listen to the words that Jephthah sent to him. Then the spirit of the ever-living came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and advanced to Mizpah of Gilead. For Mizpah of Gilead was in subjection to the Beni Ammon. Therefore Jephthah vowed a vow to the ever-living, and said, If you will deliver the Beni Ammon to my hand, then whatever first comes out of the doors of my house to meet me upon my returning with peace from the Beni Ammon shall be the Lord's, and shall be offered as an offering. Jephthah then advanced against the Beni Ammon to fight with them, and the ever-living gave them into his power, and he conquered from them Aroer, and as far as the pass of Minnith, 20 villages, and onwards to the vine-fields, a very great conquest. Thus the Ammonites were subjected to the children of Israel. When, however, Jephthah returned to Mizpah to his home, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and dances, and except her alone there was no child to his house. So when she approached him, he tore his robes, and said, Alas, my daughter, you have overwhelmed me with sorrow, and you are my grief. For I have opened my mouth to the ever-living, and I am not able to go back. But she answered him, My father, if you have opened your mouth to the ever-living, do to me according to what has come out from your mouth, since the ever-living has made a triumph for you over your enemies, the Beni Ammon. Then she asked her father, Grant this thing to me. Give me 2 months that I may go and wander on the hills, and lament for my maidenhood, I and my friends. And he replied, Go, and sent her away for 2 months. So she and her friends went and lamented over her girlhood upon the mountains. But at the end of the 2 months she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she knew no man. Thus it became an institution in Israel that from year to year the girls of Israel should go to celebrate the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, for 4 days yearly. Chapter 12. But the men of Ephraim assembled and advanced northward, and demanded of Jephthah, Why did you proceed to war with the Ammonites, and not invite us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire. But Jephthah replied to them, There was a great contention between myself and the people with me, and the Beni Ammon and I applied to you, but you did not save me from their power. When I saw that you would not save, I took my life in my hand, and advanced against the Ammonites, and the ever-living gave them into my power. Then why do you ascend today against me to fight with me? Consequently Jephthah assembled all the army of Gilead, and fought the Ephraimites, and the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim. Then the men of Gilead said to themselves, Ephraim will escape between the Ephraimites and Manassites. So they captured the fords of the Jordan from Ephraim, and when any one of the fugitives of Ephraim said, I wish to pass over, the men of Gilead replied to him, Are you an Ephraimite? And if he answered, No, they replied to him, Say, Shibboleth. And he responded, Sibboleth, for he was not able to pronounce it. Then they seized and slew him at the fords of the Jordan. So there fell at that time 42,000 of the Ephraimites. Jephthah afterwards judged in Israel for 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died, and was buried in the city of Gilead. After him Ibzan the Bethlehemite judged in Israel, and he had 30 sons and 30 daughters sent out. And 30 daughters came in to his sons from without, and he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died, and they buried him in Bethlehem. Then Elon the Zebulunite judged in Israel after him, and he judged in Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died, and they buried him in the country of Zebulun. But after him Abdon ben Hillel the Pirathonite judged in Israel, and he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 asses, and he judged in Israel 8 years. Then Abdon ben Hillel the Pirathonite died, and they buried him in Pirathon in the country of Ephraim, in the mount of the Amalekites. Chapter 13. Then the children of Israel repeated the doing of wrong in the sight of the ever-living. So the ever-living delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. But there was a remarkable man of Zara, of the family of Dan, and his name was Manoah, but his wife was barren. She was childless. A messenger of the ever-living, however, appeared to his wife, and said to her, Look now, you barren and childless woman, you shall conceive and bear a son. But guard yourself, and drink neither wine nor beer, and eat no grapes. For you shall conceive and bear a son, upon whose head no razor shall go.
For the youth shall be a Nazarite to God from his birth, and he shall be strong and save Israel from the hand of the Philistines." The woman therefore went and said to her husband, "A man from God has come to me, and his appearance was like a messenger of God, very bright. But I did not ask him if he was so, and he did not tell me his name, but he said to me, 'See, you shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall not drink wine or beer, nor eat any grapes, for the youth shall be a Nazarite to God from his birth to the day of his death.'" So Manoah entreated the ever-living, and said, "Let the man whom you have sent appear God to me. Let him come again to us, that we may learn what the youth who is to be born must do." The ever-living therefore listened to the voice of Manoah, and the messenger of God came again to the woman when she was sitting in the field, and Manoah her husband was not with her. But the woman hastened and ran and informed, and said to him, "The man who came the other day to me has appeared to me." So Manoah arose and followed his wife, and came to the man, and asked him, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he replied, "I am." Then Manoah said, "May your word come true. What does the ever-living decide what the youth shall do?" And the messenger of the ever-living answered to Manoah, "Your wife must abstain from all that I said, from all that comes from the vine. She shall not eat of the vine, she shall not drink wine, and she shall not drink beer. She shall also eat no grapes. She must abstain from all that I have commanded." Then Manoah replied to the messenger of the ever-living, "Stay here, and I will present to you a goat's kid." But the messenger of the ever-living replied to Manoah, "If I stay, I will not eat of your bread, but if you make an offering to the ever-living, offer it." For Manoah did not know he was a messenger of the ever-living. Then Manoah asked the messenger of the ever-living, "What is your name, that I may come to you and bless you?" But the messenger of the ever-living asked him, "Why do you ask my name, when it is Wonderful?" Then Manoah took a goat's kid and a bread offering, and went up on the rock to the ever-living, and set the offering apart. And Manoah and his wife watched them. But when the flame went up from the altar to the skies, the messenger of the ever-living also went up in the flame of the altar. And Manoah and his wife saw him, and they fell upon their faces to the earth. The messenger of the ever-living, however, did not again appear to Manoah or his wife, after he had recognized that he was a messenger of the ever-living. Manoah consequently said to his wife, "We shall die, for we have seen a god." But she replied to him, "If the ever-living intended to kill us, he would not have received a burnt offering from our hands. And we should not have seen all this, and he would not have listened to us as he has." The woman afterwards bore a son, and called his name Samson. And the lad grew great, and the ever-living blessed him, and the mighty spirit of the ever-living impelled him to the camp of Dan, between Zarah and Ashtal. Chapter 14. But Samson descended to Thimnath, and saw a woman in Thimnath, a Philistine girl. So he returned and told his father and mother, and said, "I have seen a woman in Thimnath, a Philistine girl, so I wish you to obtain her as a wife for me." But his father and mother replied, "Is there not a girl related to you, or a woman in all your nation, that you should go and take a wife from the foul Philistines?" Samson, however, exclaimed to his father and mother, "Get her for me, for she is perfect in my eyes." For his father and mother did not know that it was given to him from the ever-living to seek a wife from the Philistines, although at that period the Philistines governed in Israel. Consequently Samson and his father and mother descended to Thimnath. Once formerly, when he had gone to the vineyards of Thimnath, a young lion had roared at his approach, and the spirit of the ever-living had fallen upon him, and he had torn it in two like tearing a kid, but had not told his father or his mother what he had done. So they went down and spoke to the woman, who was perfect in the eyes of Samson, and stayed some time for the marriage. But he went aside one day to look at the carcass of the lion, and observed a swarm of bees in the skeleton, and honey. So he took some into his hand, and walked along, and ate as he walked with his father and mother. Then he gave them some, and they ate, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the skeleton of a lion. Afterwards, when his father came down to see his wife, Samson made a feast, as young men are accustomed. He had visitors also with him, and he chose 30 friends who were to stay with him. And Samson said to them, Let us agree together to ask riddles. If you can guess mine in the 7 days of the feast, and relate it, I will give you 30 shirts and 30 suits of clothes. But if you are not able to guess it for me, then you shall give me 30 shirts and 30 suits of clothing. When they replied to him, Tell your riddle, and we will listen. So he said to them, There came meat from the eater, and from the strong came sweetness. And they were not able to guess the riddle by the 3rd day. But when the 7th day came, they said to Samson's wife, Open your husband and explain the riddle for us, or we will burn you and destroy your father's house with fire unless you tell it to us. Samson's wife consequently wept to him and said, You hate me now, and do not love me. You have not explained that riddle to me and my relatives. But he answered her, I have not explained it to my father and mother, so why should I explain it to you? She consequently wept over him the 7 days that the feast lasted, and when the 7th day came, he explained it to her, for she wore him out, and she explained it to her relatives. So the men of the village said to him at the end of the 7th day at sunset, What is sweeter than honey, and what stronger than a lion? But he replied to them, If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Then the spirit of enthusiasm came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and killed there 30 men, and took their clothing, and gave the suits to the guessers of the riddle. But he was furious, and went off to the house of his father. The wife of Samson, however, was left with the companions who had accompanied him. The end of chapters 8 through 14 of the Book of Judges. Recording by Mark Penfold.